We're going to be discussing project-based learning and how we can make the transition for project-based learning in the classroom seamless from the traditional instructional styles. And there are 3 ways we can do that. These are what the chapters in our book, Reinventing Project-Based Learning, Your Field Guide to Real-World Projects in the Digital Age, are going to cover. And these 3 chapters cover planning for the projects, selecting and designing the projects, and then synergizing your assessment with the projects to make sure that those assessments are accurate and effective, engaging the students' learning outcomes. As said, the first chapter covers planning, and one part of that they mentioned that I feel is very important to know about and understand is Bloom's Taxonomy of Education. And those are the 6 steps that they list in the learning process. And those first 3 are typically more associated with traditional instruction. Those 3 are remembering, which is asking the students to recognize and recall facts, understanding, which understanding what those facts mean, and then you want them to apply the facts or rules, ideas, whatever it may be, to what they are working on. And then project-based learning takes that a few steps further. It also has the students analyze or break down the information into component parts, evaluate, which is judging the value of information or ideas, and then create, which is combining parts to make a new whole. Other key ideas in this chapter, there was one quote that I thought was really good from page 63, and that is, good projects connect directly to students as frames of reference, interests, and experiences, meaning you want them to be interested in these projects that they're working on, so they'll have more desire to inquire about the problems that they encounter and different ways that they can work through them. You want it to be relatable to them. Another idea that they cover, and I just think it's very important to mention, is that textbooks are not completely useless in project-based learning. They become supplemental. They are reference material, which can help guide the students through if they encounter an obstacle or a problem or challenge. A couple questions that they pose too that I think help in the planning process are, the first being, in what ways can a project help students learn how the world works and how they will work in the world? And then also, how can it set them up to practice skills that will make them effective lifelong learners? Next chapter we cover discusses selecting and designing projects. And one part of that process that is very important is to avoid errors, or pitfalls as the book refers to them. And these errors to avoid, the first they list is when the projects are long on activity but short on learning outcomes, meaning it's a very detailed project, and then in the end, they really didn't learn a lot from it. Time is very valuable, and you want to make sure you avoid wasting time, either the teachers or the students. Next, you want to make sure it's just not technology layered over traditional practice. You also want to make sure that you avoid trivial thematic units. And then you also want to make sure you avoid overly scripted projects with many, many steps. And the problem with that, a whole lot of steps, is that it can lead to limited and predictable results. And then another error to avoid is when there's not enough focus on the formative assessment, which we will discuss a little more in the next slide, which covers the chapter 5. And then you also want to avoid assessments that don't feel authentic. And when you do create these projects, sometimes you might design one that seems really good on the surface, but once you analyze it a bit, you realize that it falls short of the desired learning outcomes. And they give some suggestions on how you can remodel a project, things to maybe include in it for the students, such as having them compare and contrast. You also want to have them maybe predict outcomes. You want them to understand causal relationships, determine how parts relate to the whole, or simply systems and how they work. Look at change over time, identify patterns or trends, examine perspectives and alternate points of view, make a well-founded judgment or informed decision, or extrapolate to create something new. Create a whole new project and take some of the more valuable parts from your original idea to make that project good and effective in them achieving those learning outcomes. And the fifth chapter that we cover is making those assessments matter. What you want to do, you want to plan for your formative assessments. And there are different ways you can do that. You can set milestones, you can plan check-ins, or you can look for other progress markers that they might have in their work. Different assessment options you can use in evaluating where they're at with the work. You can have them do some brainstorming. You can do coffee talks, maybe not exactly for the younger folk, but just sit down and have conversations with them to see where they're at. You can do concept maps, exit slips, interest inventory, portfolios, project logs, review protocols. Just anything like that helps you to assess where they're at in the project and if they're on track to reach those learning outcomes. And a few more questions from this chapter that are very valuable to ask are, what do we want the students to know and be able to do? And how will we know they have achieved learning goals? So using these tools right here, that can probably be made a little bit easier. But I think with those questions in mind, we also want to just make sure that it's relatable for the students, and you want them to be interested in what they're learning about. You want to nurture their interests, and I think that is the main idea behind it all. Nurture their interests and incorporate that into the work that they're doing. Finally, I thought we had one good quote here. It's not from the book, but from Aristotle, and it summarizes everything quite well for project-based learning, in that for the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them, which is really very simple to understand, that you're not going to learn something without doing it. So you just have to dive right in, try it yourself, learn from your mistakes, and you will work your way through that problem until you reach your desired outcome. And the reference here is our book, and that should be it.